नमस्कार दोस्तों, आज मैं आपको कुछ मार्क ट्वेन के बारे में बताऊंगा. मार्क ट्वेन is a great writer, and let me talk about Mark Twain today. And in this first episode I am covering him, and then I intend doing another show on him in which I'll cover his writings even more in detail. So here we go. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, lifespan November 30, 1835 to April 21, 1910, was born in Florida, Missouri, better known by his pen name Mark Twain. Was an American writer, humorist, entrepreneur, publisher, and lecturer. There's so many hats he wore. He was lauded as the greatest humorist the country had ever produced. Nobel laureate William Faulkner called him the father of American literature. His novels include The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876, and its sequel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1884, the latter often called the Great American Novel. He was the sixth of seven children born to Jane and John Marshall Clemens, a native of Virginia. Mark Twain was a Cornish English and of Scots-Irish descent. Only three of his siblings, Orion, Henry and Pamela, survived childhood. His sister Margaret died when Twain was 3, and his brother Benjamin died 3 years later. His brother Pleasant Hannibal died in 1828 when he was just 3 weeks old. When Twain was 4, his family moved to Hannibal, Missouri, a port town on the Mississippi River that inspired the fictional town of St. Petersburg. In his book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Slavery was legal in Missouri at the time, and it became a theme in these writings. His father was an attorney and a judge who died of pneumonia in 1847 when Twain was only 11. It's so amazing when you read about old authors, old times, even pneumonia could kill and was not treatable then. Anyway, so his father died of pneumonia in 1847 when Twain was only 11. Thereafter he went through a lot of struggle. Next year, Twain left school after 5th grade to become a printer's apprentice. In 1851 he began working as a typesetter, contributing articles and humorous sketches to the Hannibal Journal, a newspaper that Orion, his brother, owned. When he was 18, he left Hannibal Journal and worked as a printer in New York City, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Cincinnati, joining the newly formed Printers Trade Union. He educated himself in public libraries in the evenings, finding wider information than at a conventional school. A point to mark is that most of these old authors, you'll find they had a great struggle in their life, and especially with respect to education, which they could never complete, but still they turned out to be great writers. He served as an apprentice with a printer and then as a typesetter, contributing articles in the newspaper of his older brother Orion Clemens. Later on, he became a steamboat pilot. Rather, he was adopted by a steamboat pilot as a cub pilot, as a junior cub pilot, and who taught him about river between New Orleans and St. Louis. Twain studied river Mississippi extensively by learning its landmarks, how to navigate its currents effectively, and how to read the river and its constantly shifting channels, reefs, submerged snags, and rocks that could tear the life out of the strongest vessel that ever floated. It was an ordeal of more than 2 years before he received his pilot's license. Piloting also gave him his pen name of Mark Twain. As a young pilot, Mark Twain served on the steamer. While working, he convinced his younger brother Henry to work with him and even arranged a post of mud clerk for him on the steamboat. But on June 13, 1858, sadly, there was a tragedy when the steamboat's boiler exploded. Henry was badly injured. He subsequently succumbed to his wounds on June 2021. Twain claimed to have foreseen his death in a dream a month earlier, which inspired his interest in parapsychology. He was an early member of the Society of Psychical Research. Twain was guilt-stricken and held himself responsible for the rest of his life for his brother's death. He continued to work on the river and was a river pilot until the Civil War broke out in 1861, when traffic was curtailed along the Mississippi River. He later wrote a sketch, The Private History of a Campaign That Failed. He then left for Nevada to work for his brother Orion, who was Secretary of the Nevada Territory. Twain was raised in Hannibal, Missouri. This provided the setting for his books, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, the famous books. His humorous story, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, was published in 1865 based on a story that he heard in Angels Camp, California, where he had spent some time as a miner. The short story brought international attention and was even translated into French. Mark Twain earned a great deal of money from his writings and lectures, but he invested it in wrong ventures and lost most of it. So this is the point I'm making. A lot of authors have gone through a lot of struggles. Some authors have made money, but in the end, they have lost their money. He invested mostly in new inventions and technology, and also lost money through his publishing house. He later filed, for bankruptcy in the wake of these financial setbacks, but he eventually overcame his financial troubles with the help of a financier, Henry Huttleston Rogers, and paid all his creditors in full, even though his bankruptcy relieved him of having to do so. Twain and Olivia Langdon, his wife, corresponded throughout in 1868. She rejected his first marriage proposal, but they were finally married in Elmira, New York, in February 1870. She came from a wealthy but liberal family. Through her, Twain met many people, and out of them, they were abolitionists, socialists, principled atheists, activists for women's rights and social equality. The couple lived in Buffalo, New York in 1869 to 1871. He owned a stake in the Buffalo Express newspaper and worked as an editor and writer. While they were living in Buffalo, their son Langdon died of diphtheria at the age of 19 months. They finally had 3 daughters, Susie, Clara, and Jean. Later, Twain moved his family to Hartford, Connecticut, where he arranged for a home in 1873. In 1870s and 1880s, the families summered at Quarry Farm in Elmira, the home of Olivia's sister, Susan Crane. In 1874, Susan got a study room built for Twain so that Twain could have a quiet place to write. And also Twain smoked cigars constantly, and Susan did not want to do so in her own house. Twain wrote many of his classic novels during these 17 years in Hatford, that is between 1874 and 1891 at Quarry Farm. They include The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876, The Prince and the Pauper, 1881, Life on Mississippi, 1883, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1884, and a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, 1889, which is a very nice and funny book. The couple's marriage lasted 34 years until Olivia's death in 1904. All of Clement's family are buried in Elmira's Woodlawn Cemetery. Twain's journey ended in the silver mining town of Virginia City, Nevada, where he became a miner. But he failed as a miner and went to work at Virginia City newspaper, Territorial Enterprise, working under a friend. He first used his pen name here on February 3rd, 1863, when he wrote a humorous travel account titled Letter from Carson, and signed it as Mark Twain. His experiences in the American West inspired him to write Roughing It, which was published in 1872. Further, his experiences in Angels Camp in Calaveras County, California, provided him material to write. The celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County was written in 1865. Mark Twain moved to San Francisco in 1864 as a journalist and met many distinguished writers there. He may have been romantically involved with the poet Ina Coolbrith. His first success as a writer came when his humorous tall tale, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, was published in November 1865 in the New York Weekly, the Saturday Press, bringing him national attention. A year later, he traveled to Sandwich Islands, present-day Hawaii, as a reporter for newspaper Sacramento Union, where his letters to the Union were popular and became the basis of his first lectures. In 1867, a local newspaper funded his trip to Mediterranean and into the Quaker City, which is Philadelphia, including a tour of Europe and the Middle East. He wrote a collection of travel letters, which were later compiled as The Innocents Abroad in 1869. It was on this trip that he met fellow passenger Charles Langdon, who showed him the picture of his sister Olivia, with whom Twain fell in love at first sight. Upon returning to the US, Twain was offered honorary membership in Yale University's Secret Scroll and Key Society in 1868. Twain was fascinated by science and scientific inquiry. He developed a close and lasting friendship with Nikola Tesla, and the two spent much of their time together in Tesla's laboratory. In the process, he patented 3 inventions. Must say he was a genius. Twain was an early proponent of fingerprinting as a forensic technique. He featured it in his tall tale in Life on the Mississippi in 1883, and as a central plot element in his novel in Pudd'head, Wilson, 1894. Twain's novel Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, 1889, features a time traveler from the contemporary US using his knowledge of science and to introduce modern technology to Arthurian England. It's a very interesting book, just in case you've not read. In 1909, Thomas Edison visited Twain at his home in Reading, Connecticut, and filmed him. Part of the footage was used in The Prince and the Pauper in 1909, a 2-reel short film. It is the only known existing film footage of Twain. There is a plaque in Sydney Writers' Walk commemorating his visit to Sydney, Australia in 1895. Twain was in great demand as a featured speaker, performing solo humorous talks similar to modern stand-up comedy. He gave paid talks to many men's clubs, including the Authors Club at Beefsteak, Vagabonds, White Friars, and Monday Evening Club at Hartford. In the late 1890s, he spoke to the Savage Club in London and was elected its honorary member. He visited Melbourne and Sydney in 1895 as a part of a world lecture tour. In 1897, he spoke at the Concordia Press Club in Vienna as a special guest following the diplomat Charlemagne Tower Jr. He delivered a speech, The Horrors of German Language, and that too in German, to the great amusement of the audience. In 1901, he was invited to speak at Princeton's University Cliosophic Literary Society, where he was made an honorary member. In 1881, Twain was honored at a banquet in Montreal, Canada, where he made reference to securing copyright. In 1883, he paid a brief visit to Ottawa, and he visited Toronto twice in 1884 and 1885 on a reading tour with novelist George Washington Cable. This guy is different, he's an author, known as the Twins of Genius Tour. The reason for Toronto visits was to secure Canadian and British copyrights for his upcoming book, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Publishers in Toronto had printed unauthorized editions of his book at the time before an international copyright agreement was established in 1891. These were sold in the United States as well as in Canada, depriving him of his royalties. He estimated that Belfort Brothers' edition of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer alone had cost him $10,000. That was big money those days. He had successfully attempted to secure the rights for The Prince and the Pauper in 1881 in conjunction with his Montreal trip. Eventually, he received legal advice to register a copyright in Canada for both Canada and Britain prior to publishing in the United States, which would restrain the Canadian publishers from printing a version when the American edition was published. There was a requirement that a copyright be registered to a Canadian resident. He addressed this by his short visits to the country. Twain lived his later years in 14 West 10th Street in Manhattan. He passed through a period of Great Depression, which began in 1896 when his daughter Susie died of meningitis. Olivia's death in 1904 and second daughter's Jean's death on December 24, 1909 deepened his gloom. As if this was not enough, when on May 20, 1909, his close friend Henry Rogers too died suddenly. In 1906, Twain began his autobiography in the Northern American Review, a lit magazine. In April, he heard that his friend Ina Coolbrith had lost nearly all that she owned in 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and he volunteered a few autographed portrait photographs to be sold for her benefit. Twain formed a club in 1906 for girls whom he viewed as surrogate granddaughters called the Angelfish and Aquarium Club. A dozen or so members in the age group of 10 to 16. He exchanged letters with his Angelfish girls and invited them to concerts and theatre to play games. Twain wrote in 1908 that the club was his life's greatest delight. In 1906, he met Dorothy Quick, aged 11, on a transatlantic crossing, beginning a friendship that was to last the very day of his death. Oxford University awarded Twain an honorary doctorate of letters in 1907. Twain was born 2 weeks after Halley's Comet closest approach to Earth in 1835. He said in 1909, I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with the Halley's Comet. Twain's prediction was accurate. He died of a heart attack on April 21, 1910, one day after the comet's closest approach to Earth. Twain and his wife are buried side by side in Elmira's Woodlawn Cemetery. So friends, in the next episode, as in when I take it up, of Mark Twain, I will take you through his writings in a little more detail. And till then, goodbye and see you soon.